Welcome to episode 4 of my SG guitar kit build. In this episode, I'll be shaping the guitar's headstock. In the previous episode, I got the neck angle correct and scale length marked on the guitar, but before gluing in the neck, I want to do all of the woodworking while the neck and the body are still separated for easier handling. So let's get started with the headstock. Here's a really grainy stock photo of the shape of the headstock as it came in the kit. I could leave it like this, or make it look like a Gibson or Epiphone SG headstock, or make it custom. The Gibson open book style headstock is one option, which I was leaning towards initially. Epiphone's shape is very similar, with less of an upturn at the edges. If I was going to do a traditional open book style, I'd more likely mimic Gibson's look. But as I was researching how to cut headstocks, I came across SG kit build videos from Joe Piercemaker, where he mimicked the SG body horn styling on the headstock. I thought the look was super cool, so I decided to do that. First, I created a template with paper so that I could experiment before drawing on the headstock itself. To do this, I first traced the headstock onto a sheet of paper. I then cut it out and folded it in half to get a center line. To get the semicircle cut out of the middle, I used a can as a guide. I placed it where it looked visually center, and then used a straight edge to check that it was in the middle of the template. I traced the can onto the template, and then freehanded the horn on one side. I folded the template in half, and cut to make sure the template was symmetrical. Next, I transferred the template to the headstock. First, I traced the template onto the front of the headstock using a pencil. Then, I flipped it over and transferred it to the back as well, so that when I was cutting the shape, I could make sure that I had a straight cut from front to back. Now that the template is transferred, it's time to cut the headstock to shape. To cut the headstock, I'm first going to do a rough cut with a jigsaw, then a rough shaping with a rasp, finer shaping with a file, and then final shaping with 150 grit sandpaper. But first, I needed a way to secure the neck so it wouldn't move while I was working. So I clamped the neck to the table between two panels of hobby board with bench cookies by Bench Dog Tools sandwiched in between. The bench cookies helped keep the pressure off the top and bottom angled ends of the neck, and the rubber on top of them kept the neck from rolling. Once the neck was secured, I rough cut the shape with a jigsaw. I'm not super comfortable making tight cuts with a jigsaw yet, so I steered pretty clear of the traced line. I alternated between vertical cuts in and cutting against the traced template so that I was cutting off the pieces in smaller chunks. In hindsight, I would have put some support between the headstock and the table, like a rolled up towel. You can see that the headstock is flexing a little bit under the weight that I'm putting on the jigsaw. Here's the headstock after the jigsaw rough cutting. Next, I used a rasp to rough shape the headstock. I used a rasp with a slight curve in it and smoothed out the jigsaw cuts. I didn't get too close to the traced line yet though, because the rasp was creating a little bit of tear out. Here's the headstock after rough shaping with the rasp. Next, I used a file to shape the headstock more finely. The file also has a slight curve, making it easier to follow the curved shape on the headstock. I frequently checked the bottom side of the headstock to make sure I had an even cut from the front to the back of the headstock. I didn't include the entire video here because it took a few iterations to get close to the line, but you get the idea. Here's the headstock after finer shaping with a file. You can see at this point, I'm pretty close to the lines. On the last round, I wrapped a drill hole saw attachment with 150 grit sandpaper to smooth out the file markings and get all the way to the traced line. On the outside of the horns, I ditched the hole saw and just used my fingers. I could have done another pass with finer grit sandpaper, but I'm going to sand the whole guitar prior to painting, so I wasn't too precious about it. And here's the sanded result. I've sanded right up to the traced line. You may be able to see it near the center of the semicircular cutout. I did have some tear out from the rasp phase, but that can be filled with wood filler later. In the end, I'm really pleased with how the shape turned out, and I'm very happy with the choice of a less traditional shape. It's a nice custom touch that will add a little personality to the completed build. In the next video, I'll wrap up the woodworking portion of the project and fine-tune the shape of the guitar body. See you next time!